Okay, so the good news, we are toward the beginning of the fourth book, but now the drama picks up again. So you had a full book of Leviticus with very little drama, I don't want to say very little drama, very few episodes, not much plot. You had laws, you had meaning, you had ways to connect to Hashem, ways to live a moral life. All that is wonderful, wonderful part of the Torah. But now we get to the part of the Torah where the Jewish people start traveling. And once the Jewish people start traveling away from Sinai, then all the excitement begins. And of course, there are a tremendous amount of challenges. And eventually, in a few weeks, will lead to the story that causes the Jewish people to remain in the desert for 40 years. So a lot takes place. But the beginning of the book, it's still very optimistic. The Jewish people are organized. They organize around the temple. They're about to set out from Sinai. They've been at Sinai for almost a year, 10 days short of a year. And over that period, a lot has happened, but most of those episodes happened in the book of Exodus, in the second book of the Torah. The third book is much of the law. And now you start getting ready to travel, and everything, on one level, it seems like everything starts to unravel. It's like I don't know if you remember when you packed your kids in the car. So you get into the car 5 minutes in, everybody wants to know, did we get there yet? I need the bathroom, I have to stop for a drink. And the excitement begins. So once you start the journey, that's when your patience are tested. Okay, so we'll do as is our custom. We'll share the parsha in a nutshell. We'll read the stories in short, and then we can start delving in a little bit more at length and figure out what we want to focus on and how we want to apply it to our life, which is, of course, the purpose of Torah, which means lesson, and the application is key. Okay, so we share the screen. Here we go. The name of the parsha, Behaloscha, means when you raise, and is found in Numbers chapter 8, verse 2. Aaron is commanded to raise light in the lamps of the menorah, and the tribe of Levi is initiated into the service in the sanctuary. So that's the opening statement of the parsha, which the first question is, what is it doing here? We know this already. Maybe we'll address that for a minute or two in a moment. The next thing we read about is a second Passover is instituted in response to the petition. Why should we be deprived by a group of Jews who were unable to bring the Passover offering in its appointed time because they were ritually impure? So in other words, we are at the first anniversary of the Passover, and the ritual is that to celebrate Passover, as we do till this very day, we have a Seder. But unlike today, the Seder then incorporated offering the Pesach offering, as it was in the temple times, that once they built the portable temple, they offer the Pesach offering. The problem is to offer the Pesach offering, to consume from the Pesach offering, one has to be ritually pure. And there were people who were ritually impure. So they come to Moshe and they say, why should we be deprived? Why should we lose out? God instructs Moses on the procedures for Israel. I'm sorry. So the second Passover is instituted. God tells Moshe, you can offer a second Passover. You have a second chance exactly 1 month after the first Passover. Fascinating law. We could talk about that as well. Okay, next, God instructs Moses on the procedures for Israel's journey and encampments in the desert, and the people journey in formation from Mount Sinai. So they're leaving. They leave Sinai, where they had been camped for nearly a year. As soon as they start leaving, the complaints begin. And from here to the end of the parsha is complaint after complaint. The people are dissatisfied with their bread from heaven, the manna, and demand that Moses supply them with meat. Well, they first complain about other things. This is just in a nutshell. And Moses appoints 70 elders to whom he imparts of his spirit to assist him in the burden of governing the people. Miriam speaks negatively of Moses and is punished with leprosy. Moses prays for her healing, and the entire community waits 7 days for her recovery. And that's the end of this week's portion. Next week's portion is the episode of the spies, which is also a tragic episode. The last paragraph here is an understatement. There's so much drama and pain in the story, and the way the Torah depicts the story so beautifully. So if we have time, we'll do a few minutes in the earlier parts of the parsha, and then maybe we can actually read those stories inside. Very, very gripping. the complaints, Moshe's pain, God's response. A lot to talk about. Okay, I think we'll start we'll just read the first few verses inside, and we'll talk about a little bit about it a little bit, and then maybe we'll move to the later stories. The first thing we want to talk about is the notion of the name of the parsha, which is Behaloscha, when you raise, comes from the word when you raise the lamps, when you light the lamps, which is when you raise the lamps. The Lord speaks to Moses saying, speak to Aaron and say to him, when you light the lamps, the 7 lamps shall cast their light toward the face of the menorah. Aaron did so. He lit the lamps toward the face of the menorah as the Lord had commanded Moses. This was the form of the menorah, hammered work of gold, meaning it was one piece of gold that was hammered into the menorah as opposed to different parts being welded together. From its base to its flower, it was hammered work, according to the form that the Lord has shown Moses, so that he construct the menorah. Very beautiful verses, verse 1 to 4. The only question is what is it doing here? Not only what is it doing here, we already know that Aaron lit the menorah. In fact, this is the 3rd time that the Torah is telling us that Aaron lit the menorah. So the question is, why is it telling us to us again, and why at this point? So there are all kinds of interpretations, but one way to think about it, and this is going to tie to the end of the parsha, is that the Jewish people are starting to journey. And they start to journey toward Israel and toward settling in the land. And one way of thinking about the purpose of the Jewish people's journey is the image of the menorah. What's the image of the menorah? That the Jews' mission, the mission of the Jewish people individually and collectively, is to bring light to the world. And that's why, of course, we know that Aaron lights the menorah. Like I said, it's already said twice before. Why we need it twice before is another discussion. Why wasn't once enough? Another discussion. But it's reiterated here, specifically when we're about to embark on the journey, because that is the mission. The journey, everywhere we go, we're about to travel. Everywhere we go, we are supposed to be the menorah. So evoking the menorah is telling us the purpose of the mission, the purpose of the journey, the purpose of the travels, again, collectively for the Jewish people, but also individually for us. If you're living in 2024, wherever you're living, it's because you're on a journey. You're supposed to bring light to that area, spiritual light, physical light, and that's why we begin the story of the journeys with the menorah. I want to say one more beautiful point, and that is the name of the parsha. It's always good to talk about, address the name of the parsha. Literally, the name of the parsha is Behaloscha, which means when you lift up, when you raise. And it comes from the statement, when you raise the lamps, when you raise the candles, which is a very strange way of saying when you light the candles. It's an unusual way. If you want to say light the candles, you say there's a Hebrew word for lighting. Hadlakat nerot. When you light your Hanukkah menorah, you say lehadlik ner shel Chanukah. Lehadlik. Here it's Behaloscha, when you raise. Why the verb raise for the word light the menorah? So Rashi addresses this question. So I'll let Rashi speak for himself, and then I'll give you the Rebbe's interpretation of the the spiritual and psychological application of Rashi's words. So Rashi is kind enough to give us 2 interpretations of why we use the word raise for lighting the candles. And I'm looking at Rashi here. I'm highlighting the word Behaloscha, when you light. Let's see if you can make the screen a little bit bigger. I'm getting okay. So here we have Rashi. When you light. Hebrew Behaloscha, literally when you cause to ascend, when you raise. The question is, why are we using the verb when you raise to talk about lighting the candle? So Rashi says 2 interpretations. One interpretation, since the flame rises, Scripture describes kindling in terms of ascending. He is required to kindle the lamp until the flame rises by itself. This comes from the Talmud Shabbat. What does that mean? So we'll stop at the first interpretation and go to the second one. What does that mean as follows? When you're lighting a candle, you could light the candle, and then the wick is going to catch fire. but it takes time till that wick catches fire, till it goes up. You got to stick around. Sometimes when you're lighting the menorah, all of a sudden you went to the next candle, and then the previous one you realize was extinguished because you didn't wait till the fire goes up into a flame. So since the flame goes upward, so that's why you have to light it, and you have to allow for the flame to go up. That's the first interpretation. In other words, the verb when you raise is because the fire raises, the candle raises, what's the word I'm looking for? What's the word I'm looking for? I don't know. The fire the fire raises. Okay. Our sages further expounded from here that there was a step in front of the menorah on which the Kohen stood to prepare the lamps. Second interpretation is, why do we call it lighting the menorah raising? Not because we have to wait till the fire raises, not because the fire is ascending, because you are ascending. In other words, the high priest, the menorah, when he would come to light the menorah, there was a small stool. Talmud had 3 steps, and he would climb the stool in order to light the menorah. So the high priest himself was raised when he lit the menorah. So that's the 2 interpretations of Rashi. Now we know why the word when you raise is used, either because the fire goes up, the fire ascends, or because the person igniting the menorah has to ascend when he wants to climb to light the menorah. And here's what the Rebbe does with this interpretation of Rashi, makes it very, very beautiful and very practical. You have an obligation to light a menorah. Light a menorah means inspire a fellow person, right? You have the fire, and you want to light the menorah. You want to inspire somebody else. And that's the first thing you have to do. You're motivated to inspire somebody else. It could be a child, it could be a spouse, it could be a parent, it could be a neighbor, it could be anybody. The second interpretation says that when you inspire somebody else, you yourself will also be raised, right? So who's going up? The other flame is going up. The flame is going up. That's the other person's flame. But when you're going to inspire somebody else, you are going to climb the mountain. You are going to climb the steps. You are going to be elevated. And this is the dynamic here, that when you inspire somebody else, you are inspired yourself. Sometimes when you're not inspired and you reach out to somebody else, that actually helps you gain inspiration. So what it's doing to us is telling us that this hierarchy of who's the one inspiring and who's the one being inspired, who's giving who, is not as a little bit messy, not as clear as you could imagine, not as straight, not as linear. You're inspiring somebody else, but in return, you yourself are going up. You yourself are being raised. So that's a beautiful interpretation, how to see the 2 interpretations of Rashi as 2 steps of what happens within the person's own life. You reach out to somebody else, you ignite their flame. In turn, you yourself will be elevated. Whenever I talk about this talk of the Rebbe, I like to mention what the Rebbe told Rabbi Darren, Senior from Stanford, and his wife when they were married. Before, I don't know if they were while they were married, before they were married, they were certainly engaged. Maybe they were married. Maybe they were about to move to start a Chabad house. The Rebbe said like this. The Rebbe says, "You will bring warmth and joy to other people, and God will bring warmth and joy to you." So it's a similar concept where, yes, you're the one giving, you're the one inspiring, you're the one lighting the fire. The flame is going up, meaning you're inspiring, you're elevating somebody else. However, you're also being raised, and that's the step. So if I ask you in the final analysis, Behaloscha, when you raise, why does the Torah use the word Behaloscha, raise? Who is being raised? Is it you, or is it the other person? The answer is both. Okay, so that's the first thing to talk about the word Behaloscha. There's a lot more to say. Another beautiful interpretation is, again, addressing the question of why the lighting the menorah is written here again, if we already know that Aaron was commanded to light the menorah. So Rashi addresses that question as well. And Rashi says the reason why it has to be reiterated is because in the last parsha, we read how the priests offered offerings the princes, the leaders of the tribes, offered offerings in the inauguration of the temple. And Aaron sees that his tribe was excluded. Levi, the tribe of Levi, did not offer any, were not commanded to offer, did not offer any offerings for the inauguration of the temple. So according to Rashi, quotes the Medrash, so Aaron feels left out. Aaron is upset, is weakened. Aaron is discouraged, so to speak, that neither he nor his tribe have offered gifts for the inauguration of a temple. And Hashem says, don't worry. Hashem says, your lighting the menorah is greater than the gifts of the priests. So in other words, when you write it, when it says it over here, when it reiterates that Aaron is the one lighting the menorah, according to the Medrash that Rashi quotes, it's to reiterate, it's to highlight the superiority of the menorah over the gifts of the other priests. I'll read it inside, and then I'll say what the later commentaries talk about it, specifically Nachmanides. So let's read. When you light, why is the portion dealing with the menorah juxtaposed to the portion dealing with the chieftains? We just read about the chieftains. We just read about the leaders of the tribes who offered gifts. Essentially, the question is, why do you have to mention the menorah again? We already know it. Why put the commandment of the menorah again right after the story of the chieftains? For when Aaron saw the dedication offerings of the chieftains, of the leaders of the tribes, he felt distress over not joining them in this dedication, neither he nor his tribe. So God said to him, by your life, which is an expression of oath, yours is greater than theirs, for you light and prepare the lamps. So Aaron says, you feel bad you didn't bring the offerings? Don't worry, you light the menorah. That's just as good or better. I'm sorry, yours is greater, you're better. Okay, so there's a very beautiful commentary by the Nachmanides, the Ramban, 13th century commentator. And he says like this, he says, one second, let's stop a second. Why is it, of all the things that Aaron does in the temple, Aaron does all the service in the temple, why does Hashem say the candles are unique? The candles are better than what the chieftains did by bringing offerings. God could have mentioned anything else that Aaron did. God could have said the offerings, the incense, anything else. So Nachmanides says something beautiful. Nachmanides says the superiority of the menorah is that even after the temple was destroyed and all the ritual in the temple stops, the ritual of lighting the menorah does not, because we have the candles of Hanukkah, which are not in the Torah. It's not a biblical story. It's not in the Torah. But history, Jewish history played out that we celebrate the miracle of Hanukkah by lighting the menorah. We have the menorah even in the time of exile. So that's why God is telling Aaron, lighting the menorah is the greatest, because it's going to actually outlast the other rituals in the temple, even when the other rituals in the temple do not apply. Lighting the menorah will apply, and that's through each of us. We're not priests, but in a way, figuratively, we are priests. We're lighting the menorah. We do it once a year, literally, but we do it every day symbolically. And that's a beautiful concept, because what it's telling us is that what we're doing is we're perpetuating the service of the temple, which is to bring light to the world. And the reason why that, as I mentioned earlier, the reason why that's so important is because in a way that captures the essence of what we are doing and what we are doing in this world and what our mission is. So that's a little bit about the menorah. There are stories about the second Passover. There's a lot more to say, but I'm thinking of going later to the complaints. Let's start with the complaints. There's so much to talk about, there's so much to say, but if anyone has any comments or questions in the meantime, please go ahead. Otherwise, we'll read some of the stories and then we'll try to give a little bit of context. Hopefully, even if not, the stories themselves are very powerful.
Rabbi, I have a question for you.
Go ahead, please.
And my question is this. You talk about the fact that it's the responsibility not just of Aaron, not just of the leaders, but of every Jew to be a light unto the nations. Now, was that unique at that time? In other words, in many cultures, I'm sure the leader was Alexander the Great or whoever was leading the Romans or whatever, was presumably supposed to bring something to other countries.
Right.
But what I'm talking about is the democratization of the concept. Was that unique to Judaism?
I certainly think so. I'm not an expert in world cultures and world religions, but I certainly think so. And the big radical, the most radical statement that that is in some ways one of the most radical statements in the Torah is right before Sinai, a few days before Sinai. God brings a message to Moses, and Moses carries it to the people. And he says, "Va'atem tiyu li mamlechet kohanim." You, meaning all the Jewish people, will be for me a kingdom of priests. And that's a very powerful thing because every culture had priests. Every culture had a certain class of individuals who were supposed to be worshiping God and dedicated to the domain of spirituality and ideas. But those groups were actually very small and they would protect their status, and they would not try to encourage other people to learn from them. In fact, they tried to keep the power concentrated, and they tried to separate themselves from the people and keep the people ignorant and keep the people illiterate. It was very common for priests to do that because in those societies, priests enjoyed all the benefits and had all the rights, both in society, both wealth, land, and also spiritual position. Here, it comes to Sinai, and God says, and God tells Moses to tell the people, no, there's no model of a Jewish priest. I mean, of course we have a priest, but that's not, it essentially we're all priests. What Aaron does in the temple is what we're supposed to do in our own life. And every individual is a priest. Every individual is tasked with doing in their own way what the priests are supposed to do. So the priests do it in the temple, we do it in our life. But yeah, so that was a radical idea at the time, and probably still radical today.
My next question had to do with my sense, and perhaps you can answer this, or someone else on the call can answer it. That kind of radical thinking about the priestliness of everyone, I think, played a large part in the founding of America and the Declaration of Independence, because I think that there was a lot of talk about Old Testament and Hebrew, etc.,
Yes.
by our founders. Is that true, or is that just my imagination?
That's what the scholars are saying. There's a debate to how much they were influenced, or how powerfully, and which ones, and which founding fathers were more influenced than others. Again, I feel that unfortunately I'm not absolutely completely proficient in, but certainly there's a lot of evidence that the founding fathers were deeply inspired and moved by the Hebrew Bible. So yes, I think that is correct. Okay, the complaints. Are we ready? By the way, okay, there's a lot to say about the complaints, but part of the complaints is, at least according to some people, is that okay, let's leave it alone. Let's read it. Let's read it. Let the Torah talk for itself, and then we'll see if we can provide any background. Like I said, even if not, the stories are beautiful. Here we go. Okay, so verse, I'm reading at the 6th reading of the Torah. I skipped the earlier ones. Chapter 10, verse 35, 36. This is what the Jewish people would say when the ark would travel, when the Jewish people would travel. It happens to be, that's what we say in the synagogue today. When we take out the Torah, whenever the ark was set out, Moses would say, "Arise, O Lord, may your enemies be scattered, and may those who hate you flee from you." Okay, let's continue. Chapter 11, chapter 11, that's funny. Chapter 11, the people, they're going spiritually bankrupt. Okay, chapter 11. The people were looking to complain. It's very interesting. It doesn't say they complained. It says they were looking to complain. That's a translation. Literally, they were like complainers. What does that even mean? Either you complain or you don't complain. Like complainers means they're looking for what to complain. Okay. And it was evil in the ears of the Lord. The Lord heard, and his anger flared, and a fire from the Lord burnt among them, consuming the extremes of the camp. Moses cried out to God. I'm sorry, people cried out to Moses. Moses prayed to the Lord, and the fire died down. He named the place Taverah, which comes from the word burning, for the fire of the Lord has burned among them there. Okay. What exactly they complained about, we don't know. The Torah doesn't say what the complaint was. It just says they complained. That itself is telling, but that's story number one. Okay, we're not done. Now it comes to the more famous complaint, which is the complaint for meat. But the multitude among them began to have strong cravings. And they said that then even the children of Israel once again began to cry. And they said, "Who will feed us meat?" And this is an unbelievable statement. Verse 5 is, I think psychologists have to study this. We remember the fish that we ate in Egypt free of charge, the cucumbers, the watermelons, the leeks, the onions, and the garlic. But now our bodies are dried out, for there is nothing at all. We have nothing but manna to look at. Now, this is crazy, okay? They say, we remember the fish that we ate in Egypt free of charge. This is less than a year. Well, this is a year and 2 months after the Exodus. They were slaves in Egypt. They ate nothing for free. But now they want to complain for meat. They say, "Oh, wasn't it wonderful back in Egypt? We had free sushi. Now we have to eat the manna. And then we have a few verses describing the beauty of the manna. We're not going to get into that right now because we want to cover. Moses heard the people weeping with their families, each one at the entrance of the tents. The Lord became very angry, and Moses considered it evil. Now, Moses, for whatever reason, loses himself completely. In other words, up before this episode and after this episode, whenever there was trouble within the Jewish people, whenever God wanted to just annihilate them, as we'll see next week and the following week, Moses always stood as the defender. Moses never lost his cool. Moses never lost his perspective as the defender of his people, both before with the golden calf and afterward with the sin of the spies. He was the loyal defender. This story, Moshe says, I'm done, kill me. He can't handle this. And the question is, what's so bad that people want a little bit of meat? What's wrong? Kid comes home and says, I want meat. Moses sort of was ready to resign. Let's read. Moses said to the Lord, why have you treated your servant so badly? Why have I not found favor in your eyes, that you place the burden of this entire people upon me? Verse 12 is beautiful because it says, Moshe says, am I the mother? And the answer is, in other words, what you see from here is Moshe sees the role of the leader is the mother, but he says, but I didn't give birth. It's not my problem. Look at verse 12. So beautiful. Did I conceive this entire people? Did I give birth to them? That you say to me, carry them in your bosom as the nurse carries the suckling to the land you promised your forefathers? Where can I get meat to give to all these people? For they are crying to me, saying, give us meat to eat. Alone I cannot carry this entire people, for it is too hard for me. If this is the way you treat me, please kill me if I have found favor in your eyes, so that I not see my misfortune. Moshe's complaint all the way out. Then Hashem says, oh, don't worry, we'll give you 70 people. And what happens? And Moshe's a little bit upset, but Moshe doesn't think it can happen. We can talk about that also. So he says, point 70 people, and then God says, tell the people I'm going to give you enough meat for 30 days. And Moshe says, this is impossible. Moses says, 600,000 people on foot are the people in whose midst I am. And you say, I will give them meat, and they will eat it for a full month. If sheep and cattle were slaughtered for them, would it suffice for them? If all the fish of the sea were gathered for them, would it suffice for them? Then the Lord said to Moses, is my power limited? Now you will see if my word comes true or if not. And Moshe gathered 70 people, and verse 25, the Lord descended in a cloud and spoke to him, and he increased some of the spirit that was on him and bestowed it on the 70 elders. And when the spirit rested upon them, they prophesied, but they did not continue. Okay, a lot more. There's more to say about the story. We'll read another 2 verses. Now 2 men remained in the camp. The name of one was Eldad. The name of the second was Medad. And the spirit rested upon them. They were among those written, but they did not go out to the tent. We talk about what that means. Another story. But prophesied in the camp. They started prophesying. Somebody was threatened. The lad, the Medrash says it's Joshua. The lad ran and told Moses, Eldad and Medad are prophesying in the camp, which is a crisis. What's so bad about Eldad and Medad prophesying in a camp? So there are different interpretations. One interpretation is that the prophecy was that Moses is going to die and Joshua is going to bring the Jewish people into Israel. So of course this was radical stuff and dangerous stuff. Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' servant from his youth, answered and said, Moses, my master, imprison them. Moses said to them, are you zealous for my sake? And this is a beautiful verse, tying to what the doctor said, that everybody is priests. And here Moshe wants everyone to be prophets. If only all the Lord's people were prophets, that the Lord will bestow his spirit upon them. This is very powerful. Moshe is saying, what Moshe is saying is that I don't want to be, Joshua is saying to Moshe, these guys are prophesying in the camp by themselves. They're creating their own breakaway. They're a threat to the hierarchy. And Moshe says, no. Moshe says, Halavai, I wish all the people of the Lord, would be prophets. So this ties into what we mentioned earlier, but it also ties into the broader story, which we have to discuss. So here's part of the story that we read. You have it as in front of you, just like I have it. And now we'll see if we can think about what exactly the Torah is telling us, what exactly they complained about, and how does this apply to us. All this is important.
Rabbi?
Go ahead.
I don't know why it's hitting me today. Maybe the word of complaining is coming up more than usual. But what I'm wondering about is God's view of people kvetching and
Yeah,
the whole idea that in a sense Moses is supposed to respond to the kvetching like a mother who's supposed to meet all the child's demands rather than Moses saying, "What are you complaining about? I got you out of Egypt. You got manna. Stop kvetching."
yeah.
So what I'm wondering about is what's the overarching message here? Is it we shouldn't kvetch? That kvetching is definitely whining and infantile and not we're hardly being a light into the nations when we're sitting around kvetching about not having enough meat.
Right. So let's talk about that. I'll get back to that in a second. Let me here's Vicky's question, and maybe we'll address them both. We'll see what the question is. We'll see if we can address them together or separately. But yeah, this certainly it's a big theme, and I would just add that in the second story, you could say the story is about the meat. The first story, the story is about the complaining. How do I know? Because the Torah doesn't even say what they complained about. In some ways, that shows that the content of the complaint is not the point. The problem was the complaining itself. So what's the problem with complaining? In other words, when somebody's complaining, what's really happening? So that invites us to address that question. Go ahead, Vicky, please. So we're gonna go back to that, Doctor. Go ahead, Vicky.
Thank you, Rabbi. My question was actually about that. How did, because the first thing you read in Parsha in a nutshell, they complained about fish. They didn't even say meat, and somehow fish got translated into meat.
Oh no,
And
so
the fish is kind of it's not that. I mean, there's mostly kosher, but they didn't get the Torah yet. So, but how did it translate it into meat
yeah.
from
So
fish?
if you look carefully, you'll see that the fish is a little tricky because they start out by saying, "Who will give us meat?" That's the Asaf Suf. Asaf Suf means the gathering of people, the multitudes of people. Asaf Suf is not a nice word. Asaf Suf basically means the rabble. Is there a word like a rabble? Just a group of people coming together complaining, not the most prominent people. Okay, so the simple people come together and say, "Who will give us meat?" Then it says, let me share the screen. Then it says that also the Jewish people, also Bnei Yisrael, also the children of Israel also complained. So ultimately, they both complain. And when the people complain, then they say, they don't really say we want meat, that was already stated. But what they say is, we remember the fish that we had in Egypt. So that's where the fish comes in. So it's really two steps of the complaint, right? If you look over here, it starts, V'asaf Suf, verse 4, but the multitude among them. Asaf Suf, multitude. Asaf Suf means a gathering. It's just a gathering. It's the mob. Okay, so it's not a sign. It's not an expression of the prominent people. They gather and they say they had a strong craving. Then the children of Israel I made a mistake. I'm sorry. They started it, but then the children of Israel once again began to cry, and they said, who will feed us meat?" So strike everything I said till now. Both cry for meat. But then when they cry for meat, they say, "Who will give us meat?" And then they say, "We remember what we had. We remember the fish that we ate in Egypt." So in other words, they're saying that in Egypt we had fish. Now, in Hebrew, probably in English as well, I'm not sure that basar, the word meat, literally means flesh. Maybe it could apply to fish. Maybe it doesn't apply to fish. Sort of the flesh of the fish. I don't know. But the point here is that yes, that it doesn't mean necessarily that it could be that they're saying we had fish, we want meat. The bottom line is they're not happy with what they have right now. And that's what they say, what do we have now? Now we only have, we're dried out, what we have is the manna, as opposed to Egypt, we had fish, we had cucumbers, we had watermelon, we had leeks, we had onions, and we had garlic. Sounds like a good menu to me. Okay, so let's try to address everything together here in the few minutes that remain. What is the complaint? What does it mean that we complain? And what does it mean that we complain? And what does it mean that, what's the lesson for us, I guess? Complain less? Well, we're supposed to, I don't know if that's the lesson. Maybe yeah, maybe no. Okay. Part of the problem, in other words, I'm just trying to figure out where to start from because there's a puzzle. You got to put all the pieces of the puzzle together. I think the doctor alluded to it in a way when you say this is not being allowed into the nations. part of the problem here is, and why Moshe takes so strongly to this, he tells God, kill me. Never did it before, never did it after. The Jewish people had far bigger sins in the desert. Okay, number one, they make an idol 40 days after God says don't make an idol. Then they say we don't want to go to Israel. We're afraid God is not strong enough to allow us to enter Israel, which is basically heresy and basically a rejection of the promised land. So they were serious sins, and Moshe has no problem with defending the Jews and shepherding them back on track after those terrible sins. Here they say we want some meat. Moshe cannot handle it. He says, I'm out, I'm resigning, kill me. What happened? What are you killing yourself for? So again, I think that what's happening here is that Moshe sees that the Jewish people are, or he suspects, you'll see that God doesn't agree, but Moshe suspects that the Jewish people are not on the same page as him. They missed the whole point, right? What's worse, asking for an idol or asking for meat? So on the surface, you could say asking for an idol is much worse. But on the other hand, no, asking for an idol, if you're serving an idol, at least you're thinking about the transcendent, you're thinking about God, you're thinking about serving something greater than you. Okay, so your faith is misplaced. Instead of believing in God, you believe in the idol. Okay, so we can get you back on track. But at least you're thinking about ideas, you're thinking about God. But if you're just asking for meat, you're just thinking about your palate, you're just thinking about your own cravings, then to Moshe saying, you missed the whole point. You've been at Sinai for a year. We built a temple for God. We have a spiritual mission. We're lighting the menorah. We're being a light unto the nations. And then when the push comes to shove and it comes to the moment of truth, what do the people want? They want to know what's for supper. And Moshe's like, I don't speak the same language as these people. And it's devastating to Moshe because he feels like a failure. He feels that he's wasting his time. Nobody's getting the message, because his message is to elevate them to spirituality. And he sees, I'm doing this alone. So he says, I cannot do this alone. Doesn't only mean I cannot lead the people alone. He says, I cannot bear the Jewish mission alone. Can't be the only one who cares about the Jewish mission, which is to bring light to the nations. I need other people to do it with me. And you could read this verse, and it's a little bit negative. You can read the story, but the end of the story, at least according to the Hasidic interpretation, is that God tells Moshe, take it easy. There are other people. There are 70 people. And ultimately, as Moshe says, the paraphrase from Moshe, all the people are Nevi'im, all are prophets. Everybody is engaged in bringing the light into the world, light in the menorah. There are stages, there are grades, it takes time. You still have cravings, you can't divest yourself from your cravings immediately. But make no mistake, you're not alone. There are other people, first of all, the 70, but then the other people also who are prophets. And ultimately, Moshe realizes this because at the end, he says, I want everybody to be prophets. So he realizes you can have a meat craving. That's part of you. That's your physical existence. You also have a spiritual side. And there's a balance and there's a battle, but one does not negate the other. So ultimately, at the end of the story, Moshe sees what God shows him by taking the 70 elders and saying, you're going to shear the light from you and give it to other people. Moshe senses that everybody can be a prophet. And Moshe senses that everybody is a prophet. In other words, even the people who want meat, they want meat, but they also want to spread the light. And therefore, don't be so hard on yourself saying, I'm a failure. You're not a failure, because the people you're talking to are not failures. So that's a little bit about the meat. I want to say one more metaphor about that. And then I want to go to the complaint in general, which was the doctor's question, which is a very important concept in my opinion. Okay, so I'm just going to go here to one beautiful Rashi. And it's not in the verse, but it's in the Rashi. And this connects the end of the Parsha and the beginning of the Parsha. So you see the theme keeps coming back. Okay, so let's look at Moshe. God says, gather 70 people, right? Verse 17, gather 70 people. I will come and speak with you there, and I will increase the spirit that is upon you and bestow it upon them. What is increased? It's not clear what Rashi says. Rashi says it comes from the word increase, but the Hebrew word is the atzalti, comes from the word in the Kabbalah, we have the word for the highest world, atzilut, emanation. So what does that mean? So Rashi says that the word atzalti comes from the word to add, increase, okay? But here, look at this beautiful Rashi. I will place it upon them. Beautiful Rashi. What did Moses resemble at that time? A candle placed on top of a candelabrum. Fancy word for menorah in Hebrew. What is Moshe like at that moment? A candle that's placed on top of a menorah. It says the word menorah. Yet, everyone lights from it, yet its brightness is not diminished. So this is the image. What does it mean? God is going to take the spirit from Moses and give it to the 70 people. Does that mean Moshe is diminished? Moshe's light is diminished? We say no. Moshe is a candle on a menorah. Sound familiar? That was the beginning of the parsha. Every person can come by with your candle, take light from the menorah, your light increases, the menorah's light is not detracted. That's the image of light. That's the beauty of the metaphor of light. So what's happening here is Moshe sees and Moshe recognizes that Moshe's light is something that everybody can take from. And in a way, that's the calling of everybody. And in a way, they want meat. That's the problem. We'll deal with the meat. But that doesn't mean people are complex. Just because they have a craving for meat doesn't mean that they abandoned their mission to take light and to spread the light. So I think that's a little bit about light. Let's talk about complaints in the next 60 seconds. The issue of complaint is that the Torah doesn't say why they complained. And then that leads to the question, what are they complaining about and why are they complaining? And who does complain and who doesn't complain in general? So one way to think about this perhaps is that complaint is not only related to how difficult your circumstances are. That is not what complaining is, because I mean difficult. I mean physically draining, because if a person is working very hard to achieve a goal that they're working toward and they want, and they're working hard to advance their career, or working hard to achieve a goal, I don't know, to even they want to climb Everest, I don't know, whatever it may be. That's not difficult. That doesn't cause complaints, because pain and effort is always understood in the context of what I'm doing. The problem, something becomes difficult and painful when I don't understand and I don't see any value in what I'm getting for this pain. Right? There's the famous story in the story. It's an interesting illustration of two people carrying a heavy suitcase, two separate suitcases, and one person is sweating, it's 100 degrees, and he's cursing and is not happy, and the other guy is smiling from ear to ear. So the guy says, why are you so happy? Isn't it as heavy as the other guy? And the other guy is cursing. He says, yeah, the other guy is carrying stones, I'm carrying diamonds. Right? So on the scale, it weighs the same. But the question is, if you understand that what you're doing and you understand and the mission resonates with you, then there's no complaints. So what happens here is the Jewish people are leaving Sinai, and this Torah, they don't fully understand the value of the Torah. And that's why Rashi says, we missed that Rashi, very important Rashi, when they said we remember the fish that we ate in Egypt for free. The question is for free, they didn't eat anything for free. So Rashi says free from commandments, free from the mitzvot. Yes, they were slaves, but they didn't have any moral obligation to God. And when they came home at night, they could do whatever they want. Now, the Torah, they see Torah as a burden. And the problem with that is that's going to cause you to complain, because that shows that they didn't value the message of the Torah. If you value it, if you appreciate it, if you appreciate what it's doing, if you appreciate what it's doing for you and for the rest of the world, then the difficulty is no longer a burden. So the thing is, when somebody complains, and when I complain, it's a moment to realign and to rethink about what is difficult in my life, what am I investing in, what am I getting, what is the meaning, and when you align with the meaning, the complaints hopefully are diminished. So it's not a question of do we complain too much. Complaining represents sort of, it's a disconnect between what I feel right now and the goal that I'm trying to achieve that is elusive for me right now. I don't necessarily feel it right now, but if I'm more in touch with that, then I would not complain, and I would feel connected to it and feel empowered by it. And maybe that's the message. So thank you very much. Go ahead, Vicky, please.
Thank you, Rabbi. If you can answer a couple of questions before, if you have time. My first question is complaint versus gratitude. Is there not enough balance between the two? Is that the problem? And then my second question, not related to complaint. It's what we read in the Parsha in a nutshell. About Moses, about Miriam being punished for speaking negatively of Moses, but Moses forgives and prays for her health and recovery.
Yeah. So that's another whole story. To open that story up is a little more difficult. The problem is she compares She thinks what Moshe is doing is wrong because he separates from his wife, according to the Medrash, and she thinks that Moshe should not because they're also she's also Moses and Aaron are also prophet. Aaron and Miriam are also prophets, and they could engage in marital relations. And basically, God is coming and saying, what God comes in and says is that Moshe is unlike any other prophet. And he's the most humblest, and therefore the greatest prophet. That's another story. And that's the message there. But I think that part of what we see there from Moshe is humble. And I think gratitude is related to humility. So the more gratitude, the more humility, I think you're going to have less complaining. But for that, a person has to be humble. Humble means it's not about myself. It's about something greater than myself. But again, that's another way of saying I'm in touch with the greater story. And the greater story is the message that I'm trying to achieve, the meaning here. So humility, it's not like I'm humble and therefore I don't complain, because what does humility mean? Not that I don't matter, not that my complaints my pain doesn't matter. That's not the true meaning of humility. Humility means it's not about myself, it's about something greater than myself. I'm devoted to something greater than myself. So I have to be in touch with that thing greater than myself in order to feel true humility, at least the way we're defining it. And in that sense, that's in other words of saying that what I said earlier, that complaint means I have the pain because the pain is because I'm not in touch with the meaning of what I'm doing. And if I'm not in touch with the meaning of what I'm doing, then the difficulties are felt as a burden. Whereas if I can feel the meaning and I see how everything I'm doing is actually, it's difficult, but it's contributing to an overarching purpose, then those same difficulties are minimized. At least the pain is minimized and the frustration is minimized because I could see that I'm working toward a goal that I'm achieving. So I think it's actually related to humility, because both humility and the lack of complaints would be being in touch with the greater story. Not about me, it's about
yeah. Thank you, Rabbi. So basically what you're saying is both forgiveness and gratitude stem from humility.
I think so. Why would I forgive? Because not that I don't matter, because for what I'm trying to create, the path forward is forgiveness. Right? So there's a greater relationship that I want to pursue, assuming the other person wants it as well. But that's another story. That goes into the details of when you forgive and when you don't forgive. That's already another discussion. But the concept of forgiveness, of moving beyond myself, it's not that I don't matter, and therefore you could step on me and then I'm going to forgive you. It's not that I don't matter. That's not what it is. It's that I am, I have a greater vision, and I want to connect to that greater vision for myself and for the other person.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you all. Have a wonderful day. See each other in good health, God willing. Thank you.